They didn't knock. They didn't speak his language at first. They simply appeared, standing beside his bed, radiating light so intense it felt alive. Before sunrise, Enoch was told his life on earth was about to pause, not end, but be suspended between worlds. What awaited him beyond the sky was not comfort, not peace, but knowledge so vast that no human had ever returned unchanged. Welcome to Hidden Origins. Here, we explore the ancient stories that exist at the edge of history and mystery. Today's journey takes us into one of the most extraordinary accounts ever recorded. According to ancient writings outside the traditional canon, Enoch was not a king, a warrior, or a prophet of armies. He was described as a righteous man, quiet, observant, and deeply aware of the order behind creation. And it was precisely that awareness that drew attention from beyond the physical world. One night, while resting alone, Enoch experienced a disturbance so intense it carried into his sleep. It wasn't fear at first, it was pressure, a sense that something unseen was drawing near. Then, without warning, two beings stood at the head of his bed. They were not human in appearance. Their faces shone like burning metal under sunlight. Their eyes flickered like living fire. Their garments shifted in color as if woven from light itself. Wings folded behind them, brighter than polished gold. Enoch awoke instantly, fully conscious, fully aware. Terror washed over him. His body reacted before his mind could understand. The figures spoke his name, not loudly, but with certainty. They told him not to be afraid. They said they were sent by the Eternal, tasked with escorting him beyond the boundaries of the earth. He was instructed to give final guidance to his family, to explain that his absence would not be abandonment and that no one was to search for him until his return. What made this moment different from a dream was clarity. Enoch did not feel confused. He felt summoned. He obeyed. He gathered his sons and spoke carefully, knowing every word might be his last on earth. He warned them not to be distracted by false powers or empty idols. He reminded them that creation itself testified to something greater than human pride. And then, without ceremony, he followed the beings outside. As the night air surrounded them, Enoch felt himself lifted, not carried, but supported, as if gravity itself had loosened its grip. The world below dimmed. Clouds formed beneath his feet. The sky did not open dramatically. It simply allowed passage. This was the first ascent. The writings describe the first heaven not as paradise, but as a realm of structure and movement. Vast seas suspended above the earth, storehouses holding snow, rain, mist, and wind, each governed, each released with purpose. Enoch was shown beings tasked with maintaining cosmic order, moving silently between elements. Nothing was random. From there, he was guided higher. The second realm was different. Light faded. The air felt heavy. Here, Enoch saw figures restrained, not by chains of metal, but by judgment itself. These were described as watchers who had rebelled against their assigned order. Their expressions carried regret, not rage. They wept continuously, aware of what they had lost. When they saw Enoch, they begged him to intercede on their behalf. He refused, not out of cruelty, but humility. He acknowledged that a mortal could not speak on behalf of beings who had already been judged. The responsibility was not his. And so the ascent continued.
The contrast between realms grew sharper. Darkness and brilliance existed side by side. Justice and mercy were not opposites, they were boundaries. Enoch was being shown that the universe was layered, intentional, and governed by laws beyond human negotiation. And this was only the beginning. If you're drawn to these ancient mysteries and want to continue exploring what lies beyond recorded history, consider subscribing to Hidden Origins. Your support allows us to keep uncovering the stories rarely discussed but never forgotten. The journey does not stop here.
The ascent did not feel like motion through distance. It felt like movement through order. As Enoch was guided upward, the environment around him changed, not gradually, but decisively, as if invisible thresholds were being crossed. Light intensified, then softened. Sound shifted from silence to harmony. What he was shown next was not judgment or confinement, but abundance shaped by intention. He was brought into a realm described as overflowing with growth. Trees unlike any found on earth stretched upward, their branches heavy with fruit that radiated fragrance rather than scent. Every surface appeared alive, not chaotic, but synchronized. Nothing competed, nothing decayed. Here, Enoch observed what the ancient texts describe as a prepared place, a domain reserved for those who endured injustice without becoming unjust themselves, those who protected the vulnerable, those who chose restraint when power was available. The environment itself reflected those values: balance, nourishment, and peace without stagnation. At the center stood a tree unlike the others. Its form seemed to shift depending on where one stood, glowing with layered colors that did not exist in the natural spectrum. The beings guiding Enoch did not allow him to approach closely. Some knowledge, he was told, was meant to be witnessed, not possessed. From that brightness, the transition was sudden. He was led toward a region where warmth vanished. The air grew sharp. Light fractured into shadows that did not move with a visible source. This place was not chaotic either. It was controlled severity. Flames existed alongside ice. Stillness carried weight. Here, Enoch was shown a realm prepared for those who deliberately caused harm, those who exploited others for gain, who corrupted innocence, who turned influence into weapons. This was not described as punishment fueled by anger, but consequence governed by law. What struck Enoch most was not the environment, but the presence of enforcers, beings tasked with maintaining separation, not delivering cruelty. They did not act with emotion. They acted with precision. The journey continued upward. In the next realm, Enoch observed the mechanics of time itself. Movements of light traced vast paths. He was shown how cycles were measured, how seasons were regulated, how days were counted, and how balance between light and darkness was maintained. He saw the paths of the sun and moon described not as independent forces, but as assigned roles. Each movement followed an established course. Nothing drifted, nothing wandered. What ancient writers attempted to describe here was not astronomy as science, but order as obedience. Strange beings accompanied these cycles, creatures whose forms defied simple classification. Their task was not symbolic, it was functional. They regulated heat, moderated intensity, and ensured consistency. Even the rising of light was supervised. Enoch realized that what humans perceived as randomness was, in these writings, a misunderstanding of scale. Higher still, sound returned, this time as layered resonance. Voices moved in patterns, not words, but alignment. These beings were described as recorders, observers assigned to track actions, intentions, and outcomes across realms. Nothing, it seemed, was unseen.
At this height, Enoch noticed something unexpected: silence among a group of towering figures. Their appearance suggested authority, yet they stood withdrawn, inactive. When he asked why, he was told these were watchers who had once abandoned their assignments. Their stillness was not rest, it was waiting. They did not speak until Enoch addressed them. When they did, their voices carried regret rather than defiance. They were aware of the consequences already set in motion. Enoch did not excuse them, nor did he condemn them. He simply acknowledged what had been shown to him, that order, once disrupted, demanded resolution. At his prompting, these beings resumed their assigned role, not because they were forgiven, but because alignment had been restored. As the ascent continued, Enoch's fear diminished, not because the journey grew gentler, but because clarity replaced uncertainty. He understood now that the universe described in these writings was not governed by impulse, but by structure. Mercy and justice operated within the same framework, and the highest realms were still ahead. If you find value in exploring these ancient accounts and the deeper meanings behind them, consider subscribing to Hidden Origins. It helps support continued research into the stories history left at the margins.
As Enoch was guided higher, the atmosphere changed again. But this time, the change was internal. Fear no longer came from what he saw, but from what he was approaching. The realms ahead were not merely places, they were thresholds of authority. He entered a region filled with structured brilliance, bands of radiant beings arranged not randomly, but in precise ranks. Their appearance was uniform, yet distinct. No one stood above another, yet all knew their role. These beings were described as governors, assigned to oversee movements of time, shifts of seasons, and the balance of life itself. Here, Enoch was shown how the natural world below it responded to decisions made far above it. Rain did not fall by chance. Growth was not accidental. Even decline served a measured purpose. What humans experienced as disorder often began as correction. Among these beings were record keepers. Their task was not judgment, but preservation. Actions, intentions, and outcomes were observed and stored, not for punishment, but for accountability. Nothing was erased, nothing was ignored. As Enoch observed this, sound began to rise, not as noise, but as layered harmony. The voices did not compete, they interlocked. It was described as order expressed through sound. Then the ascent slowed. He was brought to a boundary where light intensified beyond description. Here stood forces unlike those below, entities described as incorporeal, without defined form, yet unmistakably present. They were identified as higher authorities, closer to the source of command. Enoch felt himself weaken, not physically, but in awareness. The magnitude of what surrounded him pressed inward. He fell forward, overwhelmed not by fear, but by limitation. At that moment, another presence intervened. One of the principal messengers was sent to steady him. He was lifted, not by force, but by permission, and brought closer to the central domain. Enoch was reminded that he was not there by accident. His presence had been authorized. What he was then shown was not fully described in the writings, not because it was hidden, but because language failed. The throne was not a seat in the human sense, it was a focal point, a convergence of authority, light, and command. Surrounding it were beings whose sole function was alignment. They did not move freely, they did not wander. Their entire existence was orientation toward the center. Enoch was instructed to stand. What followed was transformation. He was told that his mortal state could not withstand prolonged exposure. His earthly identity was removed, not erased, but set aside. He was anointed, clothed in what the texts describe as garments of clarity. His perception expanded, fear dissolved into understanding. For the first time, Enoch could observe without trembling. He was then shown knowledge, not as visions, but as instruction. He was given insight into the structure of creation, how the visible emerged from the invisible, how intention preceded form, how balance was established before time began. This knowledge was not offered to the other beings present. It was entrusted specifically to him. He was told to record what he could, not everything, but what was permitted. He was shown how all lives were known before they began, how outcomes existed as potential long before choice activated them. Nothing unfolded without awareness. Yet choice still mattered. Enoch learned that the universe described in these writings was not deterministic, but responsive. Actions carried weight. Alignment produced harmony. Deviation introduced consequence. Finally, he was informed that his journey would not end there. He would return. He would speak. He would write. But not all that was seen would be shared. Some knowledge was meant to guide, not overwhelm. As the instruction concluded, Enoch understood the purpose of his ascent. It was not to elevate him above others, but to make him a witness, a reference point, a reminder that reality extended far beyond what the eye could see. And soon he would descend. If explorations like this help you see ancient texts through a deeper lens, consider subscribing to Hidden Origins. Your support allows us to continue examining the narratives that shaped belief, history, and human understanding.
The descent was quieter than the ascent. There was no rush, no sudden pull back toward the earth. Instead, Enoch felt himself gently released from the intensity of the higher realms, as though reality itself was lowering its volume so his mind could endure the return. What remained with him was not imagery alone, but responsibility. He was reminded that knowledge, once given, carried weight, that insight without humility became corruption, and that seeing beyond the visible world did not grant authority over it. Before he was sent back, Enoch was given a final understanding. The universe was not held together by power, but by order willingly upheld. Even the greatest forces were bound, not by chains, but by purpose. Creation, as these ancient writings described, was not chaotic brilliance, it was structured intention. Enoch was shown that the visible world humans inhabit is only the lowest layer of a far greater system. What appears random often begins as correction. What feels delayed is often restraint, and what seems silent is rarely absent. Then, just as his journey had begun without warning, it ended without spectacle. He awoke on earth. Time had passed, though it felt impossible to measure how much. The familiar weight of gravity returned. The air felt denser. Sound carried differently. Even light seemed slower. But Enoch was not the same.
The writings say he began to record not poetry, not prophecy in the traditional sense, but testimony, descriptions of structure, warnings about misalignment, reassurances that justice was not forgotten, even when delayed. He did not claim ownership of the knowledge. He presented himself as a witness, not a ruler of truth. His message was simple but unsettling, that human actions echoed far beyond human sight. He warned that power abused created imbalance, that neglect of the vulnerable fractured order, and that choices mattered not because of punishment, but because the universe responded. What made Enoch's account endure was not fear, but coherence. His vision described a reality where mercy and consequence existed together, where rebellion was not gone unnoticed, and where righteousness was not rewarded immediately, but preserved. Over time, his writings drifted to the edges of accepted tradition. Some considered them too expansive, others too unsettling. And yet, fragments survived, copied, referenced, debated, not because they were comfortable, but because they asked a question that never stopped echoing.
What if reality is far larger than what we've been taught to see? What if history is not only written by victors, but filtered by those deciding what humanity is ready to know? The story of Enoch endures not as doctrine, but as an invitation to consider that existence may be layered, intentional, and watching. That justice may be slower than anger, but far more precise. And that alignment, not dominance, is the foundation of order. Whether one sees these writings as metaphor, mystery, or memory, they challenge a dangerous assumption that humanity stands at the center of all things. According to these ancient accounts, we never did. We are participants, not architects, observed, but not abandoned, free to choose, but never unseen. And perhaps that is the most unsettling revelation of all. If explorations like this help you think beyond the surface of history and belief, consider subscribing to Hidden Origins. It supports deeper research into the stories that shaped how humanity understands the unseen.